Hi everybody, I hope you guys are doing great since we last talked. I've been doing alright myself, been very busy of course with school, but you know how things are when you're a teacher. I just wanted to do a quick video talking about the economics as prescribed by the Catholic magisterium, the way a Catholic should come at economics, kind of the certain principles that undergird a Catholic view of the economy. So that's something I want to talk about today. I want to first start off by saying happy Sunday to everyone, extend my well wishes. Today is the feast in the traditional calendar of the Most Holy Rosary. This was given to us by Saint Pius V. Saint Pope Pius V, they dedicated this Sunday after the Battle of Lepanto. I believe I've talked about this before in the show, but for those who perhaps forgot, the Battle of Lepanto was this part of the Crusades. It was the last part, you could say, of the Crusades, in which the Ottoman Empire was threatening Austria. And so the forces of Christendom got together one more time, and there's this great sea battle in which there was the Christians versus the Muslims, and the Muslims, or the Turks, they arrange themselves in a crescent moon shape, as is a symbol of their religion, and the Christians, a symbol of our religion, is a cross. So we arranged our ships like a cross, and that was a much more strategic position to have in this battle, and the Christians won decisively. Now, what makes this such an interesting story is that the Pope had told all of Christendom to pray the Rosary. He exhorted everyone to pray the Rosary, and so the victory was attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary, as it should be, since it was through her powerful intercession and protection that the Christians became victorious and were able to keep Europe safe from the Ottoman invaders. So that's a great story there to remind us that we should always pray the Rosary, and that it is the most powerful weapon, most powerful prayer that we have as Christians, as the church militant, besides, of course, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Alright, so talking about economics and the Catholic Church, there was two really important encyclicals that did a lot to, I guess, shape the economic landscape during the Industrial Revolution and Post-Industrial Revolution. This was Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII, and then later Quadrimisio Anno, 100 years later, by Pius XI. And both of these encyclicals set forth certain principles on which Catholics should base their views of the economy. And contrary to what certain libertarian Catholics will tell you, the Pope and the Magisterium certainly has a role in talking about which principles should govern an economy, because faith and morals plays into almost every facet of our lives. Just as we can talk about the importance of the family and why abortion should be illegal, things of those sort, everyone, I think, would agree that the Catholic Church has a stake in this and needs to exhort our rulers, our leaders, to ban certain intrinsic evils. In the same way, they also have to encourage them to set up certain guidelines to foster the common good. And the common good, when it relates to the market, is not some laissez-faire anarchist utopia. Neither is it, by the way, something that is third positionist or socialist, and we'll get into exactly what it is, but I want to start by just laying down some rules here, some framework, you could say, and also give some context. You have to remember that Leo XIII was writing during the Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of changes. Things have no longer on an agrarian economy that was supported by guilds and supported by just farmers working for themselves. People no longer had to make their own clothing. Instead, now there were factories. This new economy with factories and what you could say maybe wage slavery or something like that, servile labor. These were issues that were present, poor working conditions. And of course, you'll hear libertarians tell you that, oh, no, if you really look, though, well, the standard of living went up. And regardless if that's the case, certainly did not go up for those people who were working in the coal mines, the children who were working, and the spiritual, which is much more of an important aspect to any economy than their material well-being. Their spiritual well-being was suffering, and for that reason the Pope wrote his encyclical Rerum Novarum, which means of new things. This was the beginning of Catholic social teaching. The most important principle of Catholic social teaching is that humans have innate dignity and value as the most important principle there. And then two other principles that came out was based on solidarity and subsidiarity. And you have to understand that Aristotle, when it comes to things that are not intrinsically evil, okay? Let me preface this by saying, for things that are not intrinsically evil, that which is virtuous, according to Aristotle, is that which comes in moderation. It's like the bullseye. If you think about shooting an arrow, virtue is hitting exactly the bullseye. Anything to be below the bullseye would be considered erroneous. Anything above the bullseye is also considered you're missing the mark. And virtue is exactly this correct balance, this mean between the two extremes. You don't want excess, but neither do you want dearth. You don't want, for example, to be someone who thinks that drinking alcohol is sinful. That's actually heretical. Neither do you want to be a drunk. And so you can see that there's a balance between being a drunk, someone who abuses alcohol or abuses tobacco or something like that, and someone who understands moderation. And so finding this golden mean is the heart of virtue, according to Aristotle. And that's exactly what we have to do when we're thinking about the economy. We don't want to think in these very black and white terms of free market, entirely free market, or entirely command economy or a socialized economy, where the workers own the means of production. These kind of narratives are created by materialists. The way we should think of the market is something that serves us, people, and the most important principle, of course, is virtue. Are we being virtuous? And that requires moderation. And the principle that Leo XIII wanted us to remember, the two principles, was the moderation between solidarity and subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, if you think of like a subsidiary company or something like that, it means that there is a localization. That which can be done on the local level or at the individual level should be done at that level. So if there's something that can be done at the family level, like catechizing your children, or the level of the church, catechizing your children, for example, it should be done on that level. In fact, it is a miscarriage of justice for that to be done by like some executive state. It is a miscarriage of justice and virtue, in fact, for subsidiarity to be ignored, for there to be some like one-party state. And so this is why totalitarianism is in fact contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church. Any form of absolute monarchy or something like that, a one-party system, is contrary to the teachings of the Church, because there is subsidiarity. That which can be done on a smaller localized level should be, because it can be more effectively we can more effectively meet the needs of the people who are in want of some service. And so that is something to bear in mind. And so things that can be, if we can think about regulations of businesses, the minimum wage, these things should be done on the local level. If they can be done on the local level, that would be the proper implementation of justice and the common good. And the other principle is solidarity, which is to say this brotherhood, this universal brotherhood of all Christians and all people, because we come from the common spawn of Adam and Eve. We're all humans, we all have innate dignity, and so we should see ourselves as this collective family, that our actions are not isolated to ourselves. We're not islands. We should not think of ourselves as this in this atomized way. And this is something that we see, I think, currently in this very neoliberal bourgeois culture. This is a real issue, is that there's no sense of solidarity. I hardly even know my neighbors, and you could say that diversity and consumerism, both of those things probably have played a number in accelerating this problem. But regardless, atomization is an issue, a real issue, that needs to be addressed. And so we can't also say that everything needs to be done on some like individual local level, like libertarians would like you to think, or that they can be done at like just an individual, but rather we have to try to have a balance. And so there is in fact a role for the federal government. There is in fact a role for the community to come together. There needs to be regulations of monopolies. There needs to be regulations of externalities, whether they be moral externalities, whether they be cultural externalities. Our actions are not just contained within the 4x4 wall of our home. They affect other people. And so things, for example, like gay marriage, by normalizing this thing, this has a cultural ramification that's going to lead to necessarily, if the government is endorsing these kind of perverse marriages, or marriages really, it's not matrimony in any sacramental sense, it's really just a piece of paper that two people signed. But even regardless, the fact that the state is endorsing this necessarily means that now the state, when they're teaching about sexual education, now they also have to include homosexual propaganda, and allows for gay pride parades. You know how it goes. And so there's this real cultural externality here, and so the state needs to step in. There needs to be the role for the state to step in. And so that is what is challenging, is where do we draw the line between solidarity and seeing ourselves as a family, a collective, and subsidiarity, seeing ourselves as like localized. We have to do that which can be done on a smaller level, should be. And so these are two things we always have to bear in mind, and we have to try to find the common good, that which is going to promote the most virtue. That is what the common good is, promoting virtue, and it requires moderation. And so Leo XIII, he adds that the natural law stipulates that a man owns the fruits of his labor. If there's a farmer and he produces some crop, he owns that crop. It is his private property. And then he says in this, he extrapolates and says that it is also the natural law that if he is to own the fruits of his labor, he also has to know the process and the means through which his production was possible, and namely the seeds. He has to own the land. He needs to own like the tractor. He owns the water that he uses to water the crops, the scarecrow to keep the birds away, whatever it might be. And so then he applies this as well to the industrial economy, saying that yes, a capitalist does in fact own the means of production. The means of production should not be collectivized. They should be owned privately. That is perfectly fine. But he says now that we're in this capitalist economy, where now the means of production are no longer inanimate objects like seeds and land, now they are humans. They're human capital that we employ. And because humans have innate dignity, we are not goods to be just bartered and sold. We are not just subject to supply and demand forces. That would imply that there's some amoral quality to us humans, rational animals. But no, the most important principle of Catholic social teaching is that humans have innate dignity. And for that reason, to balance the private ownership of the means of production, the Pope said that there's also a thing called a just wage. And like I just said, the just wage is not the wage that the market determines. It's not a wage that your employer and the employee agree on collectively. It's not like it's because it's voluntary, therefore now it's moral. No, a just wage, according to Catholic teaching, is a wage that can sustain a family and it can allow them to flourish. Not just like sustain them, like keep them alive so they're not starving, they're not subsistence wages, but to thrive. For example, if you live in a society where a car is basically required, then you should be able to afford a car. And so it really is a very conditional thing, a contingent thing based on where you live and the circumstances surrounding, how much it costs to buy a home or to be able to afford to raise a family. There's a lot then to take into consideration there. And the church has never said what the wage should be. And if there is going to be a minimum wage, then it should be done again on a localized level. Personally, I think the way that this should be implemented is through a universal basic income. I think that just from my own experience in economics, I think that is just a better way to have this kind of a macro approach than a micro approach, because it can lead to unemployment, and that's obviously something we want to avoid. And so I think it'd be better to have like a universal basic income in which the society collectively comes together, pools our money, and then redistributes it as this basic wage to people who are working. I think it should be something that goes to people who are working, or people at least in the workforce. So maybe if they felt like they lost their job and they're looking for one, they can still receive this. And this is, again, a just wage is a conditional right. It is not unconditioned. It is an applied right, because as the scripture says, St. Paul says, he who does not work does not eat. And so for people who are vagabonds, as sometimes for certain textbooks and ethical textbooks written by Catholics I've read, they call them vagabonds, people who do not work, they do not get to share in a just wage. And this just wage is not something, by the way, that is individual. It has to be standardized. Otherwise, employers will not hire people who they think are going to create families. They're going to only hire people who are single or something like that. It has to be something that is standardized, and it has to be something that is mandated at some level. At some level, it does need to be mandated. And private property, just to go back real quickly, is also not an unconditioned right. It is an applied right. Thomas Aquinas writes that if a man was starving and he was on someone's apple field, it is in the interest of the common good. It is better for him to eat an apple, which may seem like stealing at first, and to live, because his right to life is a more important place in society than your right to private property. It is contingent. There is an order, a hierarchy of goods, and private property is not sacrament, okay? This idea of libertarians that taxation is theft, and taxation is because you're taking away private property or something like that, or that private property is inviolable in any and all circumstances, that is nonsense and contrary to the teachings of the popes throughout the ages. Pope Pius XII, for example, he says that expropriation, in which the state actually takes your land, is justified if it is for social fecundity. In other words, social flourishing, or for the common good. As long as a fair indemnity, in other words, a fair payment, is offered. And so private property is not something that should be worshipped or idolatrized. Neither should be the free market. We always have to have this very balanced, moderate approach about moderation, the mean between the two extremes. And the way that this has been, I think, best articulated is, in a utopian sense, is through distributism. This was something that G.K. Chesterton and other Catholics, so that distributism, a kind of very decentralized economy that's very agrarian, and has guilds, things of this sort, is one that can promote very easily the principles of subsidiarity, as well as solidarity, promoting private property, as well as a just wage. As we can see with the rise of large tech companies, the rise of monopolization and oligopolies, whether that be in pharmaceuticals, whether that be like Amazon, whatever it might be, we see that there is a real collectivization of power, of control, that undermines subsidiarity in the market, by the way, but also solidarity as well. It atomizes us. It creates a very consumerist mindset in which market forces are applied to everything. Everything is applied market forces, in which that is not the just and the fair way to do things. The most important thing is virtue and the dignity and innate dignity of humans. This is something that I had to grapple with quite a bit, because I, like many, I think, people who find themselves on the distant right, they may have started in a libertarian kind of leaning. I would say a lot of people kind of start there. I'm certainly not the only one, at least, that started in a very libertarian path. And so it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that, yes, the popes are correct here. Morality is way more important than efficiency of the markets. Morality is way more important. These transcendent principles, virtue, the common good, these are things that must be enshrined by force if necessary. Not everything can be done voluntarily. And to say that we can privatize courts, privatize all these things is just... it's like, wake up, open your eyes, okay? We live in a reality. You need to have a political view, a view of the economy and the view of politics that is pragmatic enough that, based on certain principles, it can adapt to the times. It can adapt to this modern, very industrialized system that we live in. And to do so, we have to remember private property, just wage, So socialism and the collectivized means production is out of the picture. There's private property, but there's also a just wage. Private property is not sacrament. We have subsidiarity and solidarity. Okay, so there's this balance, this balancing act that we always have to take into consideration. Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you will take away something important there. This is, of course, the principles on which the Catholic Church is always taught, and what we as faithful Catholics need to submit to.